Internet Festival. Forme di futuro.
This is all of history on one graph. On the x-axis is time compressed until sometime in the near future so it all fits. And the y-axis is a growth rate. So during the human era, the blue line, the growth rate was low at first for foragers, who doubled roughly every 250,000 years. And then there was a sharp transition, less than a doubling time, and farmers started doubling every 1,000 years. And then within a few hundred years, the Industrial Revolution created human economy doubling every 15 years. If this trend were to continue, then roughly sometime in the next century, there would be a 5-year period during which the economy would transition to doubling every month or so. That sounds crazy. One of the most common speculations about something that could dramatically change the economy is robots as smart as people. The most straightforward scenario is we keep writing better software, the way we've been writing it for many years. When I talk to people who are experts in that area, because I used to do that, and I ask them how far have we come in the last 20 years in the field you know best, they say roughly 5 to 10% of the distance to human level abilities. At that rate, it would take 2 to 4 centuries. Some people say, yes, we're about to have a sudden acceleration and things are going to go much faster now. Maybe, maybe not. I'm going to talk about a third scenario, a different way we could achieve robots as smart as people. The idea is like porting software. Today, if you have an old computer that's running software you like, and you want similar software to run on a new computer, one way to do it is to stare at the old software, try to guess how it works, and then write new software on the new computer that acts like you think the old one works. But another approach is to write what's called an emulator. An emulator makes the new computer look like the old computer to the software. And then you could just move the software without understanding it. So the idea is to do that for the human brain. We'll need 3 technologies to be good enough, and none of them are there yet. First, we need lots of cheap, fast, parallel computers. Second, we need to take specific human brains and scan them in fine spatial and chemical detail to see which kinds of cells are where, connected to what. And third, we need computer models for each kind of cell in the brain saying how it processes signals, how it takes input signals, changes internal state, and sends output signals. If we've got those 3 kinds of technologies, then we can put together an entire model of a particular brain, and then we could hook it up with hands, eyes, ears, mouth, and if it's a good enough model, it'll have the same input-output behavior. So we could talk to it, it would talk back, you could ask it to do things, it might do them, and if you'd have that, you'd have a brain emulation, which I call an M, and then everything changes. I've written this book about what could possibly happen. Now, usually when the subject comes up, people are fascinated by questions like, is it even possible to make a machine that emulates a human? If you made one, would it be conscious, or is it just a silent machine? If you made one of me, is it me, or is it someone else? These are all fascinating questions I'm going to ignore. I want to ask what I think is the neglected question of what would actually happen. How does the world actually change? Think of 3 ways to talk about the future. One is to take recent trends and project them forward, decrease religion, fewer work hours, less marriage, and try to ask, how does the world change? A second way is to imagine disruptive technologies like self-driving cars or blockchains and say, when would they happen, in what form? But a third kind of futurism is to say, imagine one of those disruptive technologies, how does the world change as a result? A lot of people don't think that's possible. Like me, when I was a physics student, they were taught there's no such thing as social science, it's all made up, and we don't know anything, and therefore it's impossible to say anything. But now I'm an economics professor, and I know different. It is possible to say things, and I've written this book to try to show that it's possible. This is a map of all of academia showing the different fields connected by co-citations. These are all the fields that I've drawn on for this book. I have an unusually diverse background, and I'm trying to make that into an advantage here. So this allows me to take the strategy of picking the low-hanging fruit. I'm going to just go through area by area of academic consensus and apply it to this strange scenario. When it gets complicated or hard, I just quit and go on to the next thing. So I'm going to look for my keys under the lamppost. This is what we theorists do everywhere, and this is a theoretical exercise. I'm going to make simplifying assumptions as necessary to get concrete conclusions. So here are my methods. This is my last slide before I tell you the conclusions of what this world is like. First, I'm trying not to be creative or original other than by asking this unusual question: how does the world change if we get brain emulations? Second, I'm not going to try to tell you how the world should be. I'm not going to paint a heaven or hell. I'm just going to try to describe what seems the most likely outcome if we did the least to stop it. I'd rather this didn't sound like a science fiction movie or comic book, but more like a history textbook or a business case book. I'm going to focus on the robots because that's where most of the action is, but we're going to talk about humans some. I'm not going to tell you about the history of the universe for the next trillion years. My ambition is only to tell you about the next era after ours that's as different from our era as ours is from the farming or foraging eras that came before us. I'm going to focus on what happens after a transition. Transitions are hard to predict. People are stressed. It's hard to know where they're going. But you're now in the industrial era. You know what it's like, and it's easier to talk about what your lives would be like. As an economist, I'm going to use our standard first cut tool, which is supply and demand. That is, I'm going to assume when people are buying and selling things, there's a lot of buyers, a lot of sellers, not much regulation. I'm not saying there shouldn't be regulation. This is just our first analysis tool to figure out what would happen without it. Finally, these emulations are going to be simple and opaque, at least in the early M era. You can turn them on, turn them off, erase them, copy them, run them fast, run them slow. That's it. You can't take one person's music and another person's sport and combine them together with a third person's Christmas vacation memory. You can just do those things I said. All right, those are my working assumptions, and now I'm going to tell you about the age of M. First, I can tell you some things that are true for any world dominated by robots. Because robots can be represented as computer files, you can archive them and make them immortal. Now, today, houses and cars are in principle immortal. You can keep repairing them forever, but you usually don't. So in principle, immortality doesn't mean actual immortality. Computer files can be sent around the world at the speed of light. So these or any other kind of robots can travel around the world at the speed of light. Their file moves and then they move into a body at the other end. You know, you fear that if we kill nature, you will die. It's a reasonable fear. But robots know that if they're made in factories out of things dug up in mines, they will not die. They are less afraid of killing nature. You can make copies of computer files, and that has enormous implications. First of all, it means wages quickly fall to subsistence level for the robots, which is well below human level. We'll talk about humans in a moment. Because you can make copies so fast, the economy can grow much faster than our economy has. All it takes for the economy to double every month or faster is to be able to make things in factories that substitute for humans just as fast as we've ever been able to make things in factories. So the economy could double every month. And if the economy doubles every month, and it takes a year to get to Mars, there's no point. There's not much interest in space travel in this area, and this era may only last a year or two before something else happens, although to the emulations, it lasts for thousands of years. Humans must retire. Very quickly, they lose their ability to earn wages. But collectively, humans own pretty much all the capital in this new economy. If the economy doubles every month, their wealth doubles every month. So collectively, humans get very rich very fast. How well any one person does, however, depends on whether they have sufficient assets, insurance, or sharing arrangements to have a stake in the new economy. That, I predict, will vary from place to place. Beware. All emulations start out as having been a human, so their mental characteristics are within the human range. However, they're not typical humans. This economy, because copies are easy and wages are low, is a very competitive economy, so they will focus on the most productive humans to train and make many copies of. That means on any sort of graph of smart or hardworking, the emulations are not in the middle of the distribution, they're off to the top. They're the very best. In fact, most emulations are copies of the few hundred most productive humans. That makes emulations as elite as typical billionaires, Nobel Prize winners, head of state, Olympic gold medalists. They're all that good, and they know it. They may look back on humans with nostalgia and gratitude, but not so much respect, which is, if you think about it, how you think about your distant ancestors. We know many things that correlate with who's more productive in our society, so we can just use those to predict features of emulations. They're likely smart, conscientious, workaholic, typical peak age productivity, say for us it's about 50, married, even religious. These are things that correlate with productivity in our world today. Most jobs in an advanced economy are desk jobs, same for emulation economy. So most of them have desk jobs. Because they're already on a computer, there's no point in giving them a little physical desk. You might as well give them a virtual reality desk. The cost of making a luxurious virtual reality compared to the cost of running their brain is really small. So they have gorgeous virtual realities all the time. In virtual reality, they never need hunger, pain, disease, grime. Their bodies are always beautiful. But if you'll notice, these are all desks. They are working most of the time. It's a subsistence economy where they need to work most of the time to earn just enough to survive. Some of you, when you were children, may have thought, I'm weird. I wonder if I'm from another planet. And someday I'll meet other people from my planet, and then I'll find people that are like me. For emulations, this is literally true. They all come from the same few original humans, and so they each have millions or billions of other copies of the same original human out there who are more like them than even twins are like you. So they have this new unit of social organization that they can use for law and finance and politics that they do use. This is your life. You start and then you end. This could be the life of an emulation, however, who every day when they're ready for work, they make a small number of short-term copies who stand in line at the DMV or something else and then end, and only one copy goes on to the next day. We'll talk more about that in a moment. This is an opportunistic M. They make more copies of themselves whenever there's demand for them, and others there's less demand, go away. This is a designer. They conceive a design for an entire system, and then they break into copies who then design the parts of the system, and then at the end, they can conceive and implement a much larger, more coherent design than humans can today. That's another thing emulations can do. This is an emulation plumber who remembers that every day for 20 years, they only ever worked 2 hours a day. A life of leisure. Every day when they were ready for work, 1,000 copies of the plumber were made, all of whom worked a 2-hour day, and one of them went on to the next day. Objectively, this M is working well over 99.9% of the time, but subjectively, they remember a life of leisure. They don't have to see their life as being hard. They can see themselves as having a life of leisure. Your brain is fluid intelligence when it's young, and then crystallized intelligence when it's old. You get old, and old dogs have trouble learning new tricks. This is a general phenomena for complicated systems. It happens in software. It's called software rot. So as emulations get older, they will become more fragile and less able to learn new things and eventually need to retire and be replaced by younger emulations. So that means there'll be new emulations trained from the same initial copy, but with new methods. And so emulations around themselves will see younger and older versions of themselves and have a very good idea of where their life was going, even knowing what job and spouse, etc., they might have, and seeing how that goes farther into their life. So again, this is you who starts and then ends. This could be you who, at the beginning of a party, took a drug that meant that you would not remember that party the next day or ever after. I'm told some people do this. The question I have for you is, at the end of this party, would you say to yourself, I'm about to die. This is terrible. The person that I am is a new creature that was created at the beginning of this party, and it will end in a few hours, and then the creature that goes on isn't me because he doesn't remember what I remember. You could see it that way, or you could see it as, no, I will go on, I just don't remember what I did tonight. You could see it either way. Emulations have the same choice. When they split off a short-term copy who then works for a few hours and then ends, they could see it as a new creature who's about to die, or they could see it as another part of me that I don't remember. I predict they will choose to see it that second way because that's more productive in this world, and it's a very competitive world. Those who choose to see it this way, they will make more copies, they will win in competitions, and this is how emulations will see it, whether that's right or wrong. Now, if you had colleagues and they didn't remember what you talked to them about yesterday, that would get frustrating. So even though the emulations might not mind ending themselves, they probably copy as whole teams together who then work together as teams and then end or retire together as teams. It's hard to meet celebrities. Their time is rare. But for emulations, it's easy to meet celebrities. They just make a new copy every time somebody wants to meet the celebrity. The hard thing to get to do for an emulation is to have the celebrity remember you, because the copy doesn't last. But we can use that to have more trust. So today, if your government says we must invade Iraq, and you say, why? Why must we? And the government says, sorry, can't tell you state secrets. You don't know what to believe. But for an emulation, you could have the leader of a country go inside of a safe with a copy of you, the two of you inside the safe, they can explain all of their secret reasons. And at the end, the only thing that comes out is one bit. Was I persuaded or not? Was I convinced? And now you can know that you were convinced by the reasons without knowing what the reasons were, allowing more trust and selective sharing of secrets. You might not really want to know. This is your life in general. You train when you're young, then you work in the middle, and then you retire when you're older. Emulations have the same three phases, but they can train a small number of copies and then make many copies of those successful trainees, and then all those copies can work. And then when they retire, if they're not rich enough to pay for an ordinary full-speed retiree, they can just retire slow. Because as I said, emulations can run at different speeds, and the cost is proportional to speed over a wide range. So if you just retire slower, it's cheaper that way. So that means there's a huge range of speeds of emulations. And they'll probably clump just for the same reason that we tend to clump into cities today, to run at the same speed so they can interact with each other. And higher speed M's are actually higher status in many ways. They embody more wealth, they win arguments, they know things first, they are premium locations. So this is a class hierarchy based on speed, where the higher speed M's really do have quite legitimate reasons to claim they are better. At the low end, the very slow emulations are most retirees, and they are like ghosts of our literature. If you recall, ghosts are creatures who are out there all around us, but they don't know very much about your world. They're obsessed with the past. They don't really have much influence, but you could talk to them if you wanted to. That's what the emulation's slow retirees are like. In our world, we clump into cities, but we're not all in one big city. We are in many cities, and the main reason is that as we make cities bigger, we have traffic congestion. People find it harder to get around. But for emulations, they can interact with anyone in a city just by, in virtual reality, sending the bits that represent the interaction without actually moving themselves. And this means they don't have these traffic congestion costs, so they can clump into much bigger cities. And in fact, most emulations are in a small number of very dense cities, leaving the rest of the world mostly for the humans. Today, in virtual reality, you can interact with anybody on the Earth, and your reaction time of 1/10 of a second is longer than the time it takes a signal to go around the Earth, which means you don't have to know where they are with a good enough transmission line. However, emulations, when they run faster than human, they need to be closer. If they run 16 times faster than human, they need to be within 1,000 kilometers. And if they run 256 times faster, they need to be within 60 kilometers. So this limits how fast emulations want to go. If they go too fast, they start to notice delays with others around them when they try to interact. On the other hand, if they go too slow, then their job skills are irrelevant quickly into their career because the economy changes so fast. So the sweet spot trade-off is roughly 1,000 times human speed. Typical emulations run at 1,000 times human speed that fits a whole career in a doubling time of a month, which means their world is more stable than your world is. And the entire M era, which may only last a year or two, for them would be thousands of years. So enormous time to have cultural and economic development, even though to the humans outside it only seems like a year or two. This is my last slide. I know you're very tempted to evaluate this world. You're tempted to say, I love it or hate it, But think that your ancestors of 1,000 years ago would have loved or hated your world based on the first few things they heard about it, because that's the way we people are. But your world is complicated. If you would want them to think about and learn about your world before they made much of a judgment about it, because in fact, your world is really just weird. The same way for the future, it's just weird. But I know that you want to evaluate it, so let me list some pluses and minuses. First, remember, no pain, hunger, grit, disease, beautiful bodies. They're less afraid of death. They have a huge population who finds their life worth living. If you ever said, I could not live in a small town because there's not enough going on there, they say that about your cities, because their cities are so much larger and more complicated with so much more going on. They have a larger economy that can afford to spend more to create great art and music and even things like drugs. They are highly virtuous and able. Remember, Nobel Prize winner level people. Their world is stable. On the other hand, they are working at subsistence wages, which is how pretty much all humans lived until a few hundred years ago. It's the usual case in history. It's not a strange hypothetical. They're okay with it. They often split off short-term copies at ends. There's more inequality, both of wealth and this class of speed hierarchy. They're in bigger, more bureaucratic firms. They may destroy nature. They won't go into space much. They'll probably have less democracy, more religion. This is the age of M. Work, Love, and Life, When Robots Rule the Earth. I have a book available out to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you. Grazie.
Internet Festival. Forme di futuro.